So today we'll explore the VectorStyler shape effects. So that's another very powerful feature and also very, very deep. So we'll try to explain the basics of how it works and then explore some of the effects. So let's start with basic setup. So for this, you need to open the shape effect panel. That's the most convenient way to manage those effects. We'll take a shape. And we'll start by adding a shape effect to this shape. So let's take, for instance, envelope. So you see envelope effect, shape effect has been added to the rectangle object. And you see there's a little icon here that represents this effect. So if we click here, we can access some parameters. But the more powerful way to change those parameters is to click on the little pencil icon here. And now you get ways to, like we've picked envelope distort. So here we can distort the envelope of this shape. The original shape remains intact, so we can disable and view the original shape. We can stack multiple effects on top of each other and edit them dynamically. So you can keep it dynamically as an effect, or if you want, you can also convert the selected object to curves, and then what you have is a path which has no longer an effect. So that's the basics of how to add an effect to a shape. So now let's explore some of those effects. So I'll take a grid to better visualize. And we'll start maybe with distortions, concentric warp. So again, click the button here, and now you can move those points here and edit dynamically the effect. So this one is nice because you have a way to control the scope of the effect, so this will leave the rest of the grid untouched. And here you can really control how it works. Maybe you have additional parameters that you want to tweak, but generally the interactive settings are very, very well chosen. Another one would be shape bump in the distortions. So it's also doing some sort of distortion, but this time what you can do is choose the shape. So instead of a circle, we'll take a square. And so you can choose whatever shape you use to distort this grid. Let's try this one, perturbation. So this one is kind of applying a random wrapping of the grid, so you can control the amplitude on both axes. And you have a lot of noises to explore, so a lot of possibilities here to distort your shapes. There's another category called a mesh, which is more classical, so you get the 4 points, which is good for perspective mapping. Bend is quite nice as well, bending. So here you double click to add a point, and you can bend your shape. So you can change it from a sharp cusp node to a softer curve. There's also a setting which allows you to keep line. So it's not very visible on this example. Next one would be elastic warp. So elastic warp works by setting pins like this and then moving them to distort. So it's using a slightly different mesh than the classical mesh distort, so it's more triangulated. So you can go very extreme. Then there's a lot of warp patterns, so the classical arc and they some more, let's say, exotic, like sponge. So that's an overview of all those modes which are taking the whole shape and applying a mesh to it and transforming the mesh. Now there's another category called outline, which I will demonstrate using closed shapes, let's say, like these ones. So let's take one of them, which is the offset path. So you can change the offset. You can keep the original path and run the steps. You can mirror the effect. So very nice effect. And what you notice is I selected two shapes and clicked once to apply an effect to each of them, but each of the effect is independent. So I can go here and change the offset. It will apply to this shape. Now if I select both of them, it will change them together. So that's very, very useful if you have multiple shapes you want to apply the same effect to. When you remove the effect, it will remove it for each shape independently. Now let's look at how we can apply shape effects to repeaters. I'm going to add a repeater. So let's apply, for instance, envelope warp. Select the effect, click the little pencil. The shape effect applies to the repeater, and you keep the repeater adjustable, so it's not converted to curves yet. Everything is kept dynamic. Now the other thing you can do when you have multiple shapes selected or repeater is use an option called rigid shapes. So rigid shapes will keep the shapes rigid, so the same shape as before, but change their position based on the shape effect. So very, very useful to make your grid more like a cloud of shapes and control the density and everything with a lot of accuracy. You can also ask it to rotate the shapes. Gives a nice movement here. You could also ask it to scale the shapes based on the distortion, but keep them rigid. And you could apply this only on the width or only on the height. Okay, so we've covered the shape effects applied through the shape effect panel here as a dynamic effect. There's another way of working. So let me remove this repeater and use a grid instead. Another way to apply effects is through the tools here, the tool panel. So let me take this panel here. You will notice that there's a little, you see the same names as you were seeing in this panel here for some of the distortions, but you see them as a tool. So let's take this one, shape bump. So if you remember, it was, when applied on the whole shape, it was creating like a circular bump in the middle of the shape. Now if we apply it on this grid, it's applying it locally, which is completely different. So it's the same algorithm, but it's applied on a very local basis. So let me cancel that. If you double-click this icon here, you get an option panel where you can change the brush size, intensity, and then all the factors of this tool, and you can apply it. So you see by changing a few parameters, you get a completely different effect. The wave tool, this one can be nice. So we'll change the extent here. Once you apply those effects, the original shape, which was a grid, is no longer a grid. Now it's been converted to curves, because those effects are kind of destructive, so they don't appear here as an effect layer, but they instead directly change the path, which can be very useful in some cases where you don't want to stack up too many of those dynamic effects. Finally, so let me go back. You can find also the distortions that we talked about before, the different wrap modes. So you can apply it, but what it does here, when you click on the shape, it does apply an effect layer. So it's the same as clicking here, but it's more direct, because directly you are in edit mode. So it can be, if you are using an effect quite often, might be good to put the shortcut here in the toolbar, and you can access it in one click. You can directly edit it. So that's a more direct way to add a shape effect. But it's quite different from this icon here, where the brush is used to apply the shape effect very locally. Okay, that's it for today. We've seen VectorStyler shape effects. I hope this was useful, and thank you for listening.